For this video, we're going to be talking about ecological niche, and this is for IB section 4.2. An ecological niche is the unique role of a species within its ecosystem. It's multi-dimensional, so there's multiple different aspects that come to make this, and it can be impacted by many different elements. And those elements would be both abiotic and biotic components. For example, the zone of tolerance that a species can survive within helps to determine the habitat. Also, its ability to access different resources, specifically food, whether that be water, sunlight, carbon dioxide, or by consuming another organism. The adaptations that the species has that are necessary to acquire that food, as well as the utilization of other species to provide resources, for example, like nutrient cycling, bacteria recycling, different minerals and elements, pollination of flowers, seed dispersal, etc. All of these biotic and abiotic components help to establish the niche of a particular species. And all of these requirements must be met or the species is not going to be able to survive. And so we can see that some species are considered a niche generalist, meaning that they can consume a variety of different foods and they can thrive in a range of habitats. And the opposite of that is a specialist, and they have a very specific or limited diet and a much stricter habitat requirements in order to be able to survive. And so in this video, we'll look at some examples and things that help to establish a niche for different species and different groups of species and organisms. Typically, we would think that most organisms would require oxygen in order to be able to survive. You think of animals, and that's typically what you would think of, a requirement of oxygen. But there are some organisms, microorganisms, that do not need oxygen and actually can only live in an anoxic or an environment with no oxygen. And this would include some bacteria, archaea, and even some protozoa. Where do these conditions exist actually without any oxygen? Swamps, waterlogged soils or mud, intestinal tracts, and also in deep lakes or in the ocean and seas. We find some of these environments where there's no oxygen present, and life has evolved to be able to survive and actually flourish in these different areas. There's a couple of different categories. Obligate aerobes require a continuous supply of oxygen, so this is what we would probably think of. Animals and plants needing oxygen to be able to survive. Plants, although they do take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, they also do need oxygen in order to perform aerobic respiration. We also have obligate anaerobes, and these are only found in anoxic environments. Some different types of bacterium or archaea would be examples of these. And then we also have facultative anaerobes, and these use oxygen if it's available, but it's not necessarily required. And E. coli and yeast would be some examples within this category. For many organisms, the production of energy comes through the process of photosynthesis, and either that's directly using photosynthesis or acquiring energy by consuming something else that uses photosynthesis. And as you probably are familiar with, photosynthesis is the process of using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to be able to produce sugar and oxygen. And there's a number of different species that can do this on the planet. Plants such as mosses, ferns, conifers, flowering plants photosynthesize. There are also eukaryotic algae that can do this. Seaweeds and unicellular algae would be examples. And also different types of bacteria like cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae, as well as purple bacteria. Archaea are the groups that don't photosynthesize. They use other means of energy production. And so photosynthesis is really, for the most part, the process that produces the energy that the planet and different organisms on the planet consume and use to be able to survive. If an organism doesn't photosynthesize, it's typically then consuming organic material through some other means and from some other organism. And this would be holozoic nutrition. In animals, specifically, it's the process of consuming whole food before digestion. And this occurs in heterotrophs as well. Carbon compounds obtained from another organism, cows, for example, consuming grass. And through that consumption, they're also acquiring carbohydrates, amino acids, and even some fats. Digestion, in most cases, usually takes place internally. So the breakdown of that food happens internally, and there's a couple of different stages to that process. The first would be ingestion. That's taking in the food and getting it to the gut. There, digestion begins to take place or starts, and it's the breaking of the larger components into smaller molecules. Absorption is the third stage, in which the transport of the digested nutrients occurs across plasma membranes into the blood and into the tissues for use. Assimilation is the use of those digested foods then to synthesize proteins and other macromolecules, and really becoming part of the organism and becoming part of the tissue to help that organism to be able to survive. And then the last step is egestion, and this is when the undigested material is released from the end of the gut. And then that concludes the digestion overall process. Organisms that are able to produce their own carbon compounds from simple structures and substances are referred to as autotrophs. Heterotrophs are organisms that obtain those carbon compounds from other organisms. And another group would be a mixotroph, and these are organisms that are not exclusively either autotroph or heterotroph. They can be a combination of both. And Euglena is an example of an organism that falls under this category. It has chloroplasts, so it can perform photosynthesis when there's sufficient amounts of light, but it can also feed on detritus and other small organisms through the process of endocytosis, so it falls under both of these categories. Obligate mixotrophs, they must use both modes of nutrition in order to be able to grow and to survive, and this is most likely the need to be able to for them to be able to acquire some carbon compounds. Facultative mixotrophs are organisms that can maintain and grow using either heterotrophic or autotrophic means, but they can use mixotrophy when necessary. And another cool group is some protists can obtain chloroplast by consuming algae. These are called kleptochloroplasts, the chloroplasts that they're obtaining, because they're getting them from other organisms. Typically, those chloroplasts will survive for some duration of time, and then the wastes, as they're broken down and they don't perform their function anymore, are expelled and more are consumed. Saprotrophs are a unique type of organism that are really essential to our ecosystems in that they help to remove waste from the ecosystem. And so how they do this is by secreting digestive enzymes into the dead organic matter, and then they digest that dead organic matter externally. This is different from a similar type or group of organisms called a detritivore, whereas these are organisms that consume dead and decaying matter, also known as detritus, and they obtain energy and nutrition by consuming it. And so that would be internal digestion. So detrivores and saprotrophs are both types of decomposers in that they're breaking down and consuming dead and decaying organisms, but how they do that is different. Saprotrophs being external digestion and detrivores being internal digestion. That for saprotrophs, that digested product is then absorbed. Bacteria and fungi are examples of these. Different types of bacteria and fungi can do this, and then they release elements through that digestion process back into the ecosystem for recycle. The three main broad domains of life include bacteria, eukaryotes, and archaea. And the archaea is kind of a little less known than bacteria and eukaryotes, but they're similar. They have some similarities to both in that archaea, they don't have a nucleus, so it's similar in that case to bacteria, but otherwise they're more similar to eukaryotes. And they're adapted to live in really extreme environments like hot springs, salt lakes, soda lakes, and they have a couple of different ways of producing energy. One would be phototrophic, and so this would be through the absorption of light energy by pigments, not chlorophyll. There are others besides chlorophyll are used. Chemotrophic energy production is through the oxidation of inorganic chemicals, various different types of ions. And then heterotrophic would be oxidation of carbon compounds from other organisms themselves. So archaea have a couple of different ways that they obtain energy for their survival. The Hominidae family includes humans, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and this family is unique in that we have a specific relationship between our diet and our dentition, our teeth arrangement. And we can actually study this and compare different species and compare extinct species using fossils and skeletons to help us form some conclusions and an understanding of what those organisms ate. And this family contains some herbivores as well as omnivores. Humans are generally omnivores. some herbivores, depending on diet choices. And because of this, having both groups, omnivores and herbivores, we have a variety of teeth types within this family. And molars towards the back of your mouth are used for grinding, typically plant matter, and helping to break that down. And then towards the front of our teeth, we also have canines for tearing tougher food, meat, for example. And so in herbivores, we typically see more large, flat teeth for grinding up that fibrous plant tissue, and then omnivores have a mix for being able to grind and cut, and so they have a little bit of most. And so then by looking at these and examining these, we can see how between present-day species and comparing to past extinct species, we can form some conclusions about what they ate, how they ate it, and allow us to draw some conclusions based off the species dentition. As we continue our discussion of obtaining food, we now want to turn our attention to looking at how herbivores consume different plants. And because of this process, both herbivores and plants have some unique adaptations to be able to help them find food or trying to stop something from eating them. And again, herbivores are animals that feed exclusively on plants. They have some different structural adaptations to help them to be able to do this. For example, insects, and specifically their mouth parts. They have a great variety of different types of mouth parts, but because there's some relationships between all different insects, we see some similar homologous structures that are similar because of common ancestry, but have changed slightly over time due to specific environmental conditions and what they're eating in this case. And so some insects, beetles specifically, have jaws or jaw-like structures for being able to bite and chew and ingest actual leaf pieces. Another group would be green and black flies that have tubular mouth parts for being able to pierce leaves and stems to obtain sap, which is a sugary, watery mixture from plants, from the phloem within plants. Plants then obviously have some adaptations to be able to stop these things from happening, to stop from being consumed. Probably you've run into some of these, like on a blackberry bush, which have tough, sharp, pointed spines. Keeps you from wanting to chop them or remove them. Some plants have the ability to sting, and then some other plants also have toxic substances that are usually stored in the seeds because that's what an organism would want to eat. Sometimes herbivores develop adaptations to be able to detoxify the substances, so it's kind of outcompeting what the plant has done to compete with them. And so when this happens, it results in really specific plant herbivore specificity, where the herbivores have adapted to feed on a particular plant and don't eat other types of plants because of that. We see some similarities to plants and herbivores when we examine predators and prey. And so predators have to catch a prey to be able to acquire their food and their energy, and they have specific adaptations to help them to be able to catch, kill, and then ingest the prey. Some may die before being consumed, other actually die during digestion process. For example, a snake oftentimes consumes the organism before it's actually dead. Adaptations can be structural, chemical, or behavioral. And so some physical examples, for example, vampire bats have specific teeth to be able to pierce their prey tissue, to be able to feed on the blood of their prey. Moths have some unique camouflage to be able to blend into the environment to try to avoid being consumed, to avoid being prey. Black mamba snakes have a neurotoxin venom that paralyzes the prey and then allows them to consume them. Different moth types, cinnabar moth caterpillars, they accumulate toxic alkaloids by feeding on a specific type of plant, which then would make them not want to be eaten. They also have color patterns and banding to help predators know that they shouldn't eat them because they're toxic, because they've consumed the plants. So those would be chemical adaptations. And then behavioral adaptations for predators. Grizzly bears have different ambush strategies to be able to capture and catch migrating salmon. To avoid being consumed, blue striped snappers school, and lots of other fish do this, and it helps to reduce the chance of being eaten, predation, because it's harder to catch a single fish in a school of fish rather than just one fish swimming on its own. the behaviors can change over time. And really all of these can change over time, but behaviors especially can change over time. Grizzly bears have different strategies, and those can change. And we see dolphins have unique strategies to be able to capture their prey. So behavioral strategies and adaptations can change over time. Going in the exact opposite direction of predator and prey and herbivores, plants are not eating something, but they need sunlight and water and carbon dioxide to be able to grow and produce sugars to be able to survive. And when we find environments with sufficient water and within suitable temperatures, really the plants are competing for sunlight. And so this creates different types of forest environments, and there's different strategies that are used to be able to collect light, and that results in a variety of different form types. Trees would probably be the first thing you would think of in a forest, have a dominant leading shoot that grows higher and higher, and it can do so pretty rapidly. Different species grow at different rates, but by growing higher, it allows that individual to avoid being shaded out by other trees. And so in tropical rainforests, we see really high levels of tree growth. Lianas are a type of plant that then climb through other trees, and they use those trees as support. Results in the lianas needing less xylem for wood tissue, so it frees up energy for other processes or for that plant. Epiphytes are a type of a strategy and a type of plants that grow on the trunks and branches of trees. And this provides more light than what's on the forest floor, but the trade-off is that there's really minimal soil. Strangler epiphytes are kind of like what they sound. They climb trees and they encircle and surround the trees, and that results in eventually killing the tree. Shade-tolerant plants are those that are adapted to be able to survive with really minimal levels of light that we find on the forest floor. And so this would be like in the Pacific Northwest, ferns would be a good example of this. And then we also see some plant species use increased leaf surface area to be able to increase the amount of light that's collected, because with more surface area in the leaf, there's more chloroplasts and chlorophyll to be able to absorb that light and conduct the process of photosynthesis. Through all of these conditions that we've discussed both in this video and the previous video, organisms have very specific requirements that they need in order to be able to survive. And this tolerance range of biotic and abiotic conditions, it creates a fundamental niche. That's the fundamental requirements for that species to be able to survive. Unfortunately, we rarely see organisms obtain all of this. There's generally some sort of competition that exists, and that limits or alters this fundamental niche. And so the actual extent of the potential range of the species is what we call the realized niche, and this is usually other factors that are impacting the fundamental niche and limiting the range of the particular species. And so to finish up our discussion of niche, it's important to know that the overlapping of niches is for two different species generally is not possible. It will result in one species excluding the other due to competition, simply because one species is better able to compete for a particular niche. And that can include a variety of different factors. For example, plants obtaining sunlight, water, minerals, whatever it may be. One species is generally able to outcompete the other. Other species can adapt to a different niche, the realized niche, or it does not survive. It would go extinct. And so then this results in the limited distribution of species within ecosystems because of competition. We see very specific areas or aspects that species are able to survive.